This is a call to order the August 2nd, 2023 regular meeting of the Ducktown Council. At this time, I'd like to ask Council to approve a motion to remove item number 2 from the closed session this evening. Any discussion on removing that item? And we're going to move it to the mid-month meeting, which will be scheduled for September 21st.
Make a motion, we remove that item.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor?
Is it August, not September?
August. Good check. There being none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. The item is now removed. With that, I'd like to ask Council Member Tony Schiano if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I will. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. At this time, we're going to go to public comments. We'd like to address the council this evening. Please come forward to the podium, state your name and address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening.
Good evening, Donna.
I'm Donna Creek, and I'm the government of the Alabama Association of Realtors, and I'm going to speak to you very briefly about the National Flood Insurance Program tonight. Recently, the Board of Directors of OBAR adopted a resolution in support of federal legislation that would authorize the NFIP for 5 years and make significant changes to the NFIP. This is entitled the Reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program and Reform Act of 2023. The NFIP is currently authorized until September 30th of 2023. We have sent a copy of the resolution that OBAR adopted to Senator Budd, Senator Tillis, Congressman Murphy, and we've also sent it to Congressman McHenry, who serves as the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. He's a congressman out in the western part of North Carolina. OBAR is requesting that the town also consider adopting a resolution supporting the long-term reauthorization of the NFIP. I'm going around to all of the local governments asking them to do that. I have provided a copy to the mayor and to the clerk, and they have that. The promotion of flood insurance is part of the community rating system, and the town participates in the community rating system, so adoption of that resolution would be consistent with that. So thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for your consideration. And I'm well below the 3 minutes.
Thank you, Donna. By the way, we will take the resolution up at the mid-month meeting.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else like to address the council this evening? Being no one, we'll close public comments. Go on to item number 3, the consent agenda. Consent agenda this evening includes the minutes from the July 5th, 2023 regular meeting, approval of a contract in coastal protection engineering for a townwide beach and storm vulnerability analysis, approval of a contract with Tidewater Fibre for residential recycling collection, approval of a memorandum of agreement between the town of Duck and the North Carolina League of Municipalities for municipal accounting services, cybersecurity, and technical assistance, and certain budget amendments. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rob Mooney before we make the motion.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that we table the CP contract discussion until next month so that we have a chance to have Ken be here and be able to answer some questions about the proposals and the things that are contained in that contract.
Mr. Mooney, would you accept having that item heard at the mid-month meeting on the 21st?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Any discussion by council on the motion on the floor?
So just to make sure, the motion is to remove 3B from the consent agenda and to approve it, the consent agenda without 3B, or just to remove it?
Just to remove that item, and the rest of it can all be approved.
Okay, then you'll have a second motion to approve the consent agenda with 3B removed.
Okay.
Okay. Again, I'm just clarifying for the minutes.
Yep.
So
Okay.
we're dealing with one motion.
Right.
Any other discussion? There being none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Now you'll have a motion to approve the consent agenda without 3B.
I make a motion that we approve the consent agenda, minutes from last meeting, and the other items with the exception of item B.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. At this time, we're going to do some special presentations. At this time, I'd like to ask Police Chief Jeff Ackerman if he would join me up here, and Town Manager Drew Havens, and Police Sergeant Timothy Armstrong. As the council knows, many years ago, we passed a resolution to recognize our employees at 5-year intervals with a certificate and a gift certificate of their choice for every 5 years of service. And tonight we're going to recognize basically Sergeant Timothy Armstrong on his 5-year, which he is basically celebrating on August 20th. Tim, congratulations.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd also like Corporal Justin Naquin to come up. Corporal Naquin is also celebrating his 5-year, and he joined us on August 22nd, 5 years ago. Congratulations, Justin.
Thanks, sir.
At this time, I'm going to ask Fire Chief Donna Black and Town Manager to stay up here. And it's interesting, as we give these away, you'll notice they're all about in the July-August timeframe. It's right up to the budget and after the council allocated head count, so the directors quickly went out and hired.
You know our secret. That's good planning.
Firefighter Jose Ramirez, would you come up? Jose is celebrating his 50-year anniversary, and he joined us on July 23rd. Congratulations. Now with us tonight is Captain Jarrett Smith. He's celebrating his 15-year anniversary. He joined us on July 17th, 15 years ago. I'll present this to Donna, and she can present it to Jared when she sees him. He's recovering from some minor surgery. And this last one, I'd like to ask Director Joe Hurd if he would join us up here, and Senior Planner Sandy Cross. Sandy is celebrating her 20-year anniversary. She joined us on August 25th, 20 years ago. Congratulations, Sandy.
Wow.
Congratulations, all 5 of you.
Time flies when you're having fun. That's hard to believe.
That's good.
A result of the budget amendment. I'm the original hire for those that didn't know.
I know, 20 years. Thank you, Sandy. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Moving on to item number 5, quasi-judicial public hearings. We have none at this time. Moving on to item number 6, legislative public hearings. A public hearing discussion consideration of Ordinance 23-08, an ordinance establishing definition for drug paraphernalia sales in the zoning ordinance. I'd like to turn it over to our attorney, Robert House.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, we will open the public hearing on this amendment. As the Mayor said, the council in this matter is sitting as a legislative body. So the public hearing is open, and I'll turn it over to Joe Hurd, who will make a presentation on behalf of the town staff.
Good evening, Mayor Kitchen and members of council, members of the public in attendance. The item before you has been, you've heard the general description, but what we're doing with this ordinance is it was drafted by Town Attorney Robert Hobbs. And I'll wait for this to come up, I'm sorry. But it proposes to add a definition for drug paraphernalia sales in the zoning ordinance. And this definition ties back to the general statutes of the state in terms of what items are included in that definition. The issue we've had is that we have, and staff has been reviewing a request from businesses that wish to sell items that are considered drug paraphernalia, and we asked the town attorney for his insight onto as to the best way to define when a business is selling a few of these items and when it becomes a drug paraphernalia sales business. And so that was a challenge. There's still some interpretation involved from the staff standpoint, but it gives us a better base for legal defensibility of our decisions. The planning board members at their meeting in June evaluated this and noted that it would be an improvement over the existing situation, and the board members voted unanimously to recommend approval of Ordinance 2308. And with that, I just wanted to ask the council to consider what you have before you with the ordinance, take any other comments, of course, that are out there, and discuss consideration of approval of that ordinance. I'd be glad to provide any additional information that you would need prior to making the decision.
Thank you, Joe. I have a question. Given this this clarification, or a little bit more, just drilling down on this issue a little bit more, I understand that it's kind of hinging on still some subjectivity by the staff, and with respect to the law of the state and everything. So there's all this stuff coming together. Are you feeling that you have given, looking at this over, that you have the information that you need to be able to move forward in the planning department and the community development department to, sort of kind of weed through these questions, or is it going to help you?
It'll help us. It's a step in the right direction. I mean, ideally, in this conversation, the same type of question came up at the planning board meeting, and ideally we would have some type of quantifiable figure to work with, but the town attorney has studied this issue thoroughly, and it's difficult to do that And so it's still subject to some subjectivity, but at least it gives us a little bit more of a definition to hang our hat on. It tells people the kind of things that we as a staff are going to be looking for.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
welcome.
I have a question, Joe.
Yes, sir.
What prompted this? Are we just trying to stay ahead of the curve in anticipation, or did we have some requests or complaints, or what?
We've had 2 different businesses in the past, just say, 18 months that have come into town looking to sell these types of products as part of a larger business. And they were concerned about what they could or couldn't do. So we as a staff, working without any definition, had to come up with an interpretation on what they could or couldn't do. And so we did that. In both cases, the businesses were eventually approved, but they were told they couldn't sell certain items, but they could sell a little bit of these other items, that fall under this definition. So it was generated by staff. We did ask the council to consider, this was something that we asked for your consideration to move forward with. But we work with the town attorney to try to give us something to provide a better base for us in making those interpretations. Sandy, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Joe, has there been any other stores in town that have tried to come in and sell stuff that's not on this list?
Well, stuff it's not on the list is okay. It's just regular retail. But we do have other businesses in town that a very small portion of what they sell would fall under this, is drug. It falls under the state's definition of drug paraphernalia. For instance, the convenience store sells rolling paper. I think Winks sells some products that are probably on that list, But there's just small percentages, so they're not. That's the point of this definition, is that they're not drug paraphernalia businesses. They're a grocery store that happens to sell a few items that fall under that. So that's where the definition comes into play. So we do have at least a couple other businesses in town that do that, but none that I'm aware of who have tried to add to their ad products.
Joe, did the businesses you approved, did they come to town?
Yes, they did.
They did.
One of them is now closed, but one of them is still operating.
And they were pretty much in agreement with the rules that you had set up at that time?
Yeah, they agreed to those.
So there'd be no other questions for Joe. I'll entertain a motion to move this to
I'm sorry,
public
before we do that, let's let the public see if they
Okay.
have any questions. Any other questions for Joe at this point? Okay, thank you, Joe. At this point, I will ask if there are any members of the public who would like to address this proposal. If you'll please come forward, state your name and address, and please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing none, any remaining questions from council?
Well, I just have one. So, what What would happen if we said, no, you can't sell any of it? It doesn't matter what percentage it is. I mean, is that something you could, I'm not saying we should, I'm just asking, could we do that if we wanted to, or is it?
I would say we really didn't look at that issue per se, but I think this, what you have before you is probably a little more realistic and more defensible, and it also, if you said it has zero tolerance for it, I think it would be a difficult enforcement situation for your staff to try to enforce that, especially if it's just a business has one or two items, which I think was the goal, was to have a minimal tolerance but not a zero tolerance. But I guess it could be done, but we could look into that if we're directed to do that.
And if you had the opportunity, we include in your packet, said they'd put out a copy of the state statute, which has their definition, and it's pretty broad ranging. So there's some of these items that are considered drug paraphernalia that are used for other purposes that aren't drug related, you know, and that's the dilemma. That's kind of the, you know, where the cutoff is. So, if we exclude that, then people wouldn't, just as an example, they wouldn't be able to use rolling paper for regular tobacco, you know, just as an example. So that's one of the dilemma in just saying, no, you can't have any at all.
Any other questions? Okay, then we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. At this point, it's now time, council, for you to deliberate. Since this is a development regulation, it would only require a majority vote at this hearing.
Thank you, Robert. Any further discussion on sending this to public hearing? That'll entertain a motion.
For clarification, the motion is to approve the ordinance. So this was a public hearing, so this is actually approving the ordinance.
All right.
Yes.
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance 23-08, an ordinance establishing a definition for drug paraphernalia sales in the zoning ordinance.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Joe. Moving on to old business items deferred from previous meetings. Discussion consideration of authorizing a public hearing on ordinance 23-07, an amendment to section 30.35 through 30.40 of the town code, providing a description and duties of the planning board. Joe?
All right, thank you, Mayor Casey. So this is a comprehensive proposal that's undergone review for a period of 3 months with the planning board, and for a long time prior to that with staff and the town attorney. In looking at this, the reason that this came up is that the planning board, we have to do it again, adopted its bylaws. It's our one time. So it should, yeah. Anyway, the planning board adopted bylaws in 2004, and you recall during your recent consideration of appointing planning board members, those bylaws were brought up and, and brought to the attention of the council, and the staff was asked to look at those and review those and develop any proposals related to it. So what was done is that what we noticed is that a lot of the information in the bylaws really belongs in the ordinance. So we moved a lot of items. Part of the proposal is moving a lot of the items over to the ordinance that establishes the planning board and gives it the authority that it has. So what the ordinance proposes to do is it adds information to general purposes. It updates the list of officers for the planning board. It defines the duties for each of those officers and talks about notice requirements, meeting schedules, and the duties for the board members. So it adds all those to the ordinance. The rest of what was in the bylaws, the board saw those as being internal procedural items, and the board adopted those as its own separate rules of procedure that you have a copy of. So everything that was in those original bylaws is now either proposed to go in the ordinance that you're considering or being asked to consider, and the rules of procedure that the board already adopted. So these are the recommendations and the rules of procedure that were changes. Pardon, to the ordinance. So these are the changes in the ordinance that the planning board itself made in the proposal you have before you. So one of which is that they are recommending that all planning board members be required to be full-time residents to be eligible for the board. Presently, that's not a requirement. So just what that means is that presently someone who is a property owner who lives out of town most of the year is eligible for appointment to the planning board. And that would no longer be the case. Right now, someone who is renting a property would be ineligible, but under this proposal, if they're renting it full time, they would be eligible for appointment to the board. So that's one of the changes. Secondly, was that the board members are eligible for reappointment. It wasn't clearly stated that was the case, so they just asked that that be added. And third is similar in that even though we always done an oath of office, there was nothing in the ordinance that required that, and the board members recommended that that be included. So those were things that they added to the staff and to the recommendations of the town attorney and the town staff. So the board also, as part of their rules of procedure, amended attendance requirements. Now, again, those are internal to the board, but what they said is that if anybody misses 2 consecutive or 3 regular meetings in a year, they would have the option of recommending that that individual be removed. That decision would still be the council's to make. So the board did at their meeting, again, after 3 meetings and a lot of discussion, at their meeting on July 12th, they did unanimously recommend approval of the changes in the ordinance you have before you. And at this time, we're simply asking for council to consider a public hearing at your meeting in September for this item. But I'd be glad to answer any questions you have about the proposal.
Joe, I have one. Do we need a better definition of full-time residency? Or is there a definition of full-time residency anywhere?
That was asked at the planning board meeting as well, and the town attorney representative, it was Lauren Womble, who was there, said that that's a very challenging thing to do in terms of that. So they did not include that, but I'll let the town attorney speak to the viability of defining full-time residency and the challenges. Did you have any comments to that, Mr.
The only comment I would
Hawks?
have is that it is usually when you're trying to define residency or a domiciliary as far as there's a number of factors that go into it, but there's no bright line test for it. I mean, it can involve, where you live, where what state your driver's license is for, and your licenses on your vehicle, things like that, voting. So again, those are different factors that could be looked at, but it may be best not to get into that type of detail. However, if there's a concern about it, we could certainly go and try to investigate what other towns have tried to define that as, if there's a concern about what that term might mean.
Well, why wouldn't we do that? Look at the voter registration, driver's license. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff. It seems to me that should suffice.
Certainly, if we could, what we could do, I mean, I think you can still, obviously, after the public hearing, you can make changes, and so we could certainly bring forward at the next meeting a definition that you could consider adding to the provision. I don't think that would be substantive enough to require to go back to the planning board, but you could certainly add to your option, send it back to the planning board for that one part of the consideration.
Yeah, I think voter registration would seem to be appropriate, because if you're not a voter here in town, I'm not sure you should be sitting on a body that decides, policy for people who are voters.
I have one more thing I wanted to ask about, Joe. Under 30.37B, where it says board members shall be eligible for reappointment for additional terms. Can we include some kind of language in there that when a term expires, regardless of whether the incumbent member wants to remain on the board or not, that there has to be an advertisement and an open application for non-members of the board?
Sure. We could add that in for your consideration if the council's in agreement with that. We could add that into the ordinance before the public hearing.
I'd just like to ask one question then.
Sure.
Are we trying to tell these people then, if you served your 3 years, we don't want you anymore? basically is what that's sounding to me. Suppose there's one option, should be 2 open at one time, then 3, and we have 1 person applying. Does that mean we can still appoint those 2 that are existing there without even considering the 3rd?
Yeah, my understanding of Mr. Mooney's suggestion is not that it remove the ability for you to, for you to go back and reappoint somebody. It wouldn't remove that option. It would just state what the process would be if someone wanted, if there was particularly a midterm thing, like somebody moved out of town or something.
No, I'm talking about the end of their term. We have 2 people, and they both agree they want to be back on. That's,
You can still reappoint. This wouldn't remove, it wouldn't remove that option. It's just saying that an application would need to be submitted.
We already did this, and there was no, I think that's kind of a leap to say that we're telling people we don't want them any longer. That's not at all the intention of what I said. The point being that we've already been through this process, and I'm pretty sure that it was Joe Blockitis when his term expired the last time around. There were other people that came in and applied, but he was still reappointed nonetheless because that was the consensus of the council. And so therefore, as I said, I think it's kind of a leap to think that we're telling people we don't want them any longer. More importantly, I think what we're telling them, and as I said in the past, the planning board is arguably the most important non-elected board in this town. And we want to be able to put the most qualified and best people that we can find, and not just reappoint people because they want to keep doing it. It's fine if they are the most qualified people, but if they're not, then they need to go. It's a simple process.
Of course, this reads they're eligible for reappointment. That doesn't say they're going to be reappointed. We have rules of the town council of how we deal with the open positions, advertising them and then voting.
Yeah, so I guess it doesn't have to be in the ordinance for you to do the process, but there's no problem with adding that if it's a direction that the council wants to go.
This
That we
base,
would simply advertise.
Right.
If there was an opening, we would be advertising it due to the ordinances in there, even though that's what we do already.
and I think what Mr. Mooney is suggesting is that, not to paraphrase what you're saying,
right ahead.
but I think what he's suggesting is basically codifying the procedure the council has been using anyway. So that takes away, not from necessarily this council, but future councils. You can't just sit back and say, well, we're just going to reappoint people because we like them. Not that this board would do that, but it will actually force a public process. So open it up for applications, anyone that's interested, just like you just went through with the Board of Adjustment and the Planning Board. So it's just, I think that's what you're saying, is to codify in ordinance that piece of the process.
Well, you could just add there where it says they're eligible for reappointment, through the reapplication process or through the application process.
Yep.
That would solve that problem.
I think, the town attorney will work on some language, and I don't, Robert, this is non-substantive. I think we can make that change between now and the public hearing.
I think so. And I'll just point back as far as getting back to the first question about residency. I'll note that the town charter, when it comes to eligibility to serve on the town council, it just simply says to be eligible for election to the town council, an individual must reside in the town of Duck. That's all it says.
Okay.
I was going to ask you for that clarification.
So I think
appreciate it.
if you were to analogize that to your proposed code section, this actually is more specific, where it says not only resides, but a full-time resident of the town. So again, we can, if you like, we could further bring back even a more detailed definition or description of eligibility, but you would be going beyond your own eligibility to serve on the council per the charter.
While that's true, the council is elected, the planning board is appointed.
That's true.
And that's a major difference.
That's true.
And eligibility, I was also thinking about that goes through the Board of Elections, you know, where they kind of have to vet the candidates as well in their way, which, you know, wouldn't be part of the planning board process, so.
Well, I think it's good governance, though, to just, you know, say that people can be reappointed for sure, and they have been, but I think it's good governance to allow other people to submit an application.
Any other comments or discussion with questions for Joe?
No, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize a public hearing on Ordinance 23-07, an amendment to sections 30.35 through 30.40 of the Town Code, providing a description and duties of the planning board.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Going on to the next item, 7B, discussion consideration of authorizing a public hearing on Ordinance 23-10, an amendment to sections 156.040 and 15.058 of the zoning ordinance, clarifying where and under what criteria wireless telecommunications facilities are permitted. Joe?
Thank you, Mayor Keaton. These you might recognize from a list of potential amendments that the council approved last month. It's the same, Joe. It's the same show.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, okay. All right. So these are two of the items from that list, as they both deal with wireless telecommunication. We lumped them into one ordinance, but there are two things we're seeking to accomplish, one of which is that stealth antennas and wireless telecommunication facilities will be added to the permitted and prohibited use table in the zoning ordinance. There already is a table in the wireless ordinance, but this way, either way someone would look, they would find the correct information. And secondly, due to a situation that came up, we had a question asked about how tall one of those utility poles can be that supports those small wireless facility. And in this case, we have proposed that be 50 feet. It's limited to 40 feet in residential districts, but it's unclear in the ordinance what the overall height limitation is, and that is 50 feet in the state statutes. So we're proposing that 50-foot limit be put in place in commercial districts. It's already 50 feet in rights of way, but in the non-residential districts, we're proposing that be 50 feet. So the planning board reviewed that at their meeting on July 12th and voted unanimously to recommend approval of that standard and of Ordinance 2310. And at this point, we're asking the council to discuss this item and then make a motion regarding setting a public hearing at your September meeting.
Questions for Joe?
Yeah, Joe, the 50-foot above ground level, is that just the pole or the device on top of the pole?
It includes it all.
Joe, was there a difference between wireless telecommunication facilities and wireless telecommunication poles?
Yes, sir.
What's a facility then?
Facility is the whole array. That's everything from 500-foot tall towers to the little boxes that you don't even notice much, along the road that are more common nowadays. So that's the whole big picture. The poles are just for the utility poles, and it's defined in the state statutes. The state created provisions that exempt up to 50 feet within their rights of way, and it limits what towns can regulate
Right.
in order to help the telecommunication industry provide service. So that's why they're separate things.
And one more question. Is this related to Verizon, which I think has been going around asking for people, privately if they can put poles in their property? Is this tied in with that at all, or is this just separate?
I mean, Verizon is one of several different providers that's looking at this. Usually when we're contacted, it's through another company that deals with the location sites. And it might be Verizon, it might be another carrier, but they look for, they're out there scouting sites. They're given different radiuses or radii in terms of where the site needs to be, and then they contact people within that. But again, their best bet is located in that state right away. And you see some of those down Southern Shores at the one traffic light. We have one in town right now at Scarborough Lane that's on a pole that you probably haven't even know was there. We have a new one it was recently, they've been permitted now, right? Or not yet. We're going to have one up near the Sanderling Resort. In that area there, they had a need for a new pole with one of these. So you'll see them pop up, but I don't think we're going to see a huge proliferation of this at this time.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how big the one in Southern Shores is. It looks pretty tall, but it's not that bad, really. I mean, it's relatively unobtrusive considering how big it is.
Yeah. And as long as the equipment box is that small and that size, then it's exempt under the state law. If they want to do something bigger, it comes to you as a special use permit. So you have authority to regulate bigger, more intrusive things, but as long as it's these small wireless facilities that meet the state definition, they can do that.
So that one in Southern Shores, that mast, is one that would come through as a special use.
Right.
What we're talking about is basically what looks like a paint bucket on the side of a pole, so they're very small, those 5G.
Yeah.
And they have a control box that goes with them as well that are mounted towards the ground.
Yeah, they're not too bad.
No, it's not that big, that
I'm
big
not,
white
yeah,
mast.
yeah, I'm sorry,
Yep.
that may cause it confusion. We're not talking about that big pole, the big monopole at the intersection, you know.
Joe, they can still put them in the public right-of-ways
Yes, sir.
without any approval, right?
They're technically required to get a permit for the town. We are technically required to issue that permit. So effectively, we charge them $100 for a permit. But other than that, we can't deny it as long as they meet those standards.
Probably just gets it on our radar.
Yeah.
Any further questions for Joe? I'll entertain a motion. Send this to public hearing.
Okay, I move that if someone could put that back up.
Sorry.
There you go, Tony.
Okay, I move that we authorize a public hearing on Ordinance 2310 and amendments to sections 156.040 and 15.058 of the zoning ordinance, clarifying where and under what criteria wireless telecommunication facilities are permitted. Thank you, sir.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Joe. Going on to new business, discussion consideration of authorizing a public hearing on ordinance 23-09, an amendment to section 156.162 of the zoning ordinance, authorizing the Board of Adjustments to grant continuance and adopt rules of procedure. Joe?
Thank you, Mayor Kingston. You may ask why some of these are old, some are new. The ones that are older ones that you've already given us direction about, the ones that newer ones that haven't come before you before necessarily. So this is an ordinance that was drafted by Town Attorney Robert Hobbs, and it proposes, it does exactly what the mayor just described. You know, occasionally applicants for Board of Adjustment decision may have to go and request a continuance. And the best example I can give of this would be for a variance. A variance requires a supermajority approval, which on our board, which is 5 members, 5 voting members, requires 4 votes in favor to approve that variance, okay? So if there are only 4 members in attendance at a particular meeting, all 4 would have to vote in favor of the applicant. And the applicant may say, well, that's not fair. I want a hearing with 5 voting members. They can request a continuance. You know, they may request a continuance to bring in a witness or somebody, you know, who they can bring in. And the board has a right under the general statutes. It gives boards the right to do that in quasi-judicial decisions where you can, you know, you can continue a decision. You don't have to make it at that meeting. So our ordinance doesn't presently specify that authority, and so the town attorney has drafted the ordinance doing that. And also he added in there while he was updating that he noted that the Board of Adjustment they didn't have specific authorization to adopt their own rules of procedure. So he has proposed that be added. The planning board members did review this at their meeting on July 12th and voted unanimously to recommend approval to the council for these changes that update the authority of the Board of Adjustment. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I'll just add one thing. One thing that prompted this was, and as Joe sort of said, sometimes a applicant wants to have a witness present, but the witness can't be there, and they find out maybe a day or two before, and rather than having the board convene and then grant, or to convene the meeting at another time, then this provides that the board chair may actually take the action prior to the meeting, so you don't have to go to the trouble of having all the members come and convene the meeting, and then only to reschedule it for another time when the witness can show up. So that's that was one of the things that prompted this change, and I think it just makes for a more efficient way for the board to act and to not unnecessarily bring everybody together just for a very short time to vote to continue the meeting until a witness can be available.
I'd like to make a motion that we consider that we authorize the public hearing on Ordinance 2309, an amendment to Section 156.162 of the zoning ordinance, authorizing the Board of Adjustment to grant continuances and adopt rules of procedure.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Thank you again, Joe. Going on to item number 8B, discussion consideration of authorizing a public hearing on Ordinance 23-11, an amendment to applicable sections of the Town Code, removing the planning board from the review and approval process for special use permits.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Keaton. And again, this is one that was drafted by Town Attorney Robert Hobbs, and it proposes to amend several town sections to remove, with the purpose of removing the planning board from special use permit review during that process. And the reason being is that the board is not really a decision-making body in a quasi-judicial decision. That power, that authority rests with the town council. So the board has to be very, very careful. Otherwise, from a legal standpoint, with their involvement in that process. So this is something that is a long-standing tradition in the town of Duck, as well as many other communities throughout the state. And when they discuss this item, the planning board members, talked about the fact that they felt that their review does add value to the process as they focus on development issues, whereas the council is dealing with, you're dealing with everything from tents on the beach to projects to, the whole variety of things, and they could focus on development review. And They also noted that sometimes that is helpful in that it offers the property owner or developer a trial run, if you will, an opportunity to get before a public meeting, talk about the project, and address issues before it goes to council. So those were things that they thought of as why they felt there was value in keeping the board a part of that, but they understood, again, after conversations with the town attorney, with Ms. Womble, they talked about the legal issues that potentially presents to the town. If the board is doing things that someone could challenge a decision that you make because they feel that they weren't granted due process because the board went outside of the, outside of purely technical review during their discussions. So that was one of the reasons as to why they saw this as a positive change, is that it would help from a legal standpoint by removing the board. But secondly, it was also noted that removing the board would help streamline the approval process for applicants. In other words, they don't go to the planning board, they go straight to the town council for a special use permit. So the board voted in the end, after having those discussions of the pros and cons, they voted 3-1 to recommend approval of this ordinance to the town council. And again, I'll go back to there's several different sections where it would remove the board review, and those are listed on that slide there. Okay. I might be glad to answer any questions that the council has. And we understand that this one is definitely a bigger, a more substantive change. And the council may opt, we're asking you to consider setting a public hearing, but if you're not comfortable with that or want some more information ahead of time, we can do that. So, Mayor, whatever your pleasure.
Joe, could you explain the third bullet there, section 156-093, just from a standpoint of removes references to administrative and planning board review?
Sure. Right now, that section references the planning board's involvement in reviewing those items during the special use permit process. So if they're no longer part of that process, we need to remove that statement.
But does administrative refer to staff?
Well, staff would still review that, but this section refers to both, but it would remove the planning board from that. It's just saying that section deals with administrative and planning board, but the planning board part of that would be removed.
Joe, are there cases where, I know I've been involved in many special use permit applications over the years, and I know that when we're in these quasi-judicial hearings that we only talk about the evidence we're hearing that night, and so it has been fuzzy and difficult to parse out the information that we get from the planning board's input. So we've gone through that. I guess my question simply is, if it's a complicated project and some of it needs to go to the planning board and other parts are special use permit parts, does the regular stuff happen and then the person applies for the special use permit, or does it all get tied in together? I mean, because it seems to me we've had those kind of applications that have needed a special use permit in addition to some planning board input, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, it's an all or nothing kind of thing. In other words, if it's a permitted use, that's a staff review.
Right.
If it's a special use, then that's a council.
With input from the staff.
Correct.
I think as I recall, there have been a couple of occasions that seems like where somebody needed both a special use permit and maybe a variance or something, but in that case, you've got two hearings by two different bodies.
Okay.
But there may be another one that I'm not thinking of right now where they'd actually had to do two different things.
Okay. Thank you. I think that answers my question.
Now, one of the situations where that may come into play is that a group development, which is a larger, waterfront shop, Silver Lane, any kind of multi-tenant thing is a special use permit. So even if someone is just doing some, minor thing and not adding a use, if it's truly minor, we deal with it as a staff, but if they were changing something significant, it would require a special use permit, but I don't know, that might be some case where, you'd be reviewing the site plan, but not a use, if you get what I'm saying.
I do, yeah.
Okay.
So zoning variances are different than special use permits.
Correct.
And so a zoning variance would go through the planning board,
Just the Board of Adjustment.
Board of Adjustments. Planning board doesn't have anything to do with that.
Correct.
And then, okay. So special use permit would come into play when someone wants to use a property for a purpose other than what is specified in the zoning. Is that?
No, the ordinance is going to provide for certain things to require a special use permit, whereas a variance is a request for a use that's not allowed in the ordinance, but they're asking for an exception.
A standard, they're not allowed to do a use variance, but like a setback standard or something beyond what could be approved under special use. So there are two different types of things. There are certain uses that just by their nature are special use permit. So no matter what the design or, that's going to come to you as a use. But there are certain things in the ordinance, certain development standards for fill. As an example, you've seen, a couple of applications come to you recently on fill and retaining walls. Those are spelled out in the ordinance. There are certain standards that the council has the authority to grant a special use permit. So even though the use itself is okay, they're asking for some relief, but it can't be for anything. It's spelled out in the ordinance, the instances where that could be used. And if it's not, then it's a variance and it goes to the Board of Adjustment.
I don't know.
Could we look at the resort realty, which in theory then that should not have gone through the planning board with this new ordinance, would come directly to council. But were we dealing with setback issues and parking issues? Were they variances or were they special use?
Special use.
But those were basically, we would deal with those plus any other issues that we saw.
And again, those were special uses under the village commercial development option because it was in Duck Village.
So for example, the terrorist hearing that we just reviewed
Yeah,
at last meeting, that was a special use permit?
correct.
Okay, and that went, under the current situation, it went to the planning board first,
Correct.
and the planning board looked at it and said, okay, or whatever, or...
They
and-
make a
and make some
recommendation. Yeah.
changes or whatever based on what we see or whatever. And then from them, it comes here, and then we listen to everything based on, it was a quasi-judicial, right?
Yes.
And we evaluate the evidence, and then we make our decision. I don't know, it seems to me that the planning board is an important part of that process. I mean, it seems helpful to me to know that they've been there, they've got some advice. I mean, it was the same thing with Resort Realty. They went 2 or 3 times back to the planning board and got some guidance and some issues and that they needed to fix, and ultimately they came in and they resolved all of their special use issues, and I think they just had one setback thing, if I remember, that we voted on. But I thought the process was useful of the planning board. I mean, kind of providing a preview, if you will, of what the process was going to be. And I mean, I don't remember us relying on any of their opinions as opposed to them just stating the facts of this is what it is and this is what they want to do.
And that, the question with that becomes, at a quasi-judicial hearing, that means the chairman of the planning board or some other member of the planning board has got to come in here and testify about what they've recommended and why. And I think, you may or may not know this, Joe, what is the percentage of special use permit work that the planning board does compared to whatever, all the rest of the stuff that they're doing?
It's probably half of the time that they spend.
And so the concern that Robert raised, or Ms. Womble raised, was that this is potentially a legal issue down the road. I'm not really sure why it's potentially, because there was no explanation in her statement about why that could be. But you also said that if the planning board gets removed from the special use permit process, that staff is going to provide that information. So it seems to me that the same exposure, if you will, that you're concerned about with the planning board would also extend to the staff. And so there's no protection whatsoever if that's the problem. My own opinion is we need the planning board to stay in there and do what they're doing. I think that they're doing a good job. The whole purpose, in my opinion, of appointing qualified people to the planning board is because we trust them to make good decisions and evaluate problems and give us good answers about how to go forward from there. So I'm vehemently opposed to removing this from the planning board.
My point there goes back to what we've been told at special use permit hearings, when quasi-judicial hearings, when we're not supposed to take anything other than what we've heard here that night, and evidence, if you will. So is it possible to have the planning board work put in as evidence as part of the quasi-judicial hearing?
Wouldn't it,
What is
couldn't
put
it be
into
put in by
evidence-
it could be put in by a member of the planning board as
Yeah, I mean, it's-
testimony.
Typically, the staff put into evidence what the recommendation was. I mean, it's in the staff report. So to that extent, it is part of it already. And I think that the concern would be that if you looked at your agenda and you came into the meeting and you read the planning board recommendation and you already made up your mind, and you sort of tune out, not that you would ever do this, but if you were accused of doing that by an applicant who was, felt like they were not given due process during the hearing, and if someone felt like that they had made up their mind on the application despite the warning I give every time before it, based on the planning board recommendation, then that could be grounds for potential of a court potentially overturning the decision you made on it. For example, if you've turned it down, based on that. But again, it's really your decision. As you read through the material, including the blog post from the School of Government, they point out the problems. They don't come out and say you must get rid of the planning board from the process. They say, that if you decide to keep them, here are some cautionary steps that you can take. So, Currituck County, some years ago, that, as you know, your first attorney, Ike McCree, they removed the planning board from their process under his guidance back, I think it was in 2016. But we've not done a survey of other towns or counties that have taken similar action, but we're aware of that one.
And subsequently, Corolla is exploding all over the place. I mean, for us to be able to withstand a legal challenge to it, somebody's going to have to come in and say, well, I think that they made up their mind. Okay, where's the tangible evidence that proves that? And there won't be any, regardless of what any...
Yeah, that's right, because it could be very subjective and hard to see on the record.
Right. So, again, I'm thoroughly opposed to this. I think that the planning board is an important asset for us, and we rely on their recommendations. We rely on their expertise to go out and tell us whether something is good or bad, as well as the stuff that you guys do. I mean, your staff, how much do you rely on the planning board's recommendation when you do your job?
We don't.
You do it completely separately.
Correct.
So now, when we have a quasi-judicial hearing and there's going to be evidence presented, that's the only evidence to be considered at decision-making time, it's going to come from the staff and it's going to come from the planning board. So there's no question about whether or not this is information that was considered in the decision-making process because it was delivered during the hearing.
Well, I think contrary to this too is when the staff does a review, it's internal. When in fact we take it to the planning board, it's in the public venue. And it's even now live streamed, so the opportunity to either get information before we should have it or information that we shouldn't have is going to be out there. I would defend that quasi-judicial because in fact we could all be exposed to it, or if we attend a planning board meeting where there's that discussion. To me, it seems like we've been at odds with the planning board before in many, many instances over the years. I mean, I think they've been good advisors, but staff puts most of the information out to the planning board and they debate it and may or not agree. But I think quite honestly, we depend upon Joe and his team to bring it to us. And look at the debates we've had on special use permits. I think the planning board really probably should not be in the process. And we should go directly on this special use permits. Everything else is going to come through them, but I would agree with the quasi-judicial issue, especially since planning board meetings are open to the public and open to us.
And Mr. Mooney, if I could address one point you brought up earlier, And again, staff did not have an opinion or recommendation on this. Just so you're aware that when this went to the planning board, we did not express an opinion pro or con. Okay, so I just want to be clear that I'm not advocating for a certain position or decision on your part. But the difference between the staff review and the planning board review is that staff review is purely technical in nature. We're looking at the ordinances that you've adopted, and we're applying those to a project. The danger, the legal danger, is that the planning board is doing that as part of a public meeting where they're taking input from the public. And if they allow that to persuade them to do things, that's going beyond what they ought to be doing. And so Mr. Hobbs pointed out that that School of Government blog outlines, some very, very carefully, how a board needs to act. It doesn't expressly say you shouldn't ever have a planning board do this, but if they do, they need to stay within these boundaries. And that's where it becomes challenging. As you're well aware, when you have a room full of people, it's easy to get persuaded to do something or go beyond just a technical review in developing your recommendations. So that's the difference between the two as far as the staff versus the planning board.
And of course, the people that are at the planning board, they're not under oath. They may bring about people who are not experts, and they may present things that they may sound persuasive, but in reality, they may not. For example, if somebody is they feel like they're giving an opinion about how the value of their property may be affected, well, under the statute, that's incompetent evidence unless they're qualified, like an appraiser, to give that evidence, or traffic counts and things like that. Again, those are things that require experts, but if people that may come before the planning board, they're not under those guidelines, and they may, again, it's possible the planning board may be persuaded by certain types of evidence which may not be allowed as coming before you, but certainly if it's made again, then you would be able to hear it again, could say, well, we really cannot consider that, but despite not being able to consider that, maybe they've still made their case and can still be approved, for example. So it is a different environment in the planning board, but you make very good points that because they have technical backgrounds in these types of things, they can decipher and figure out the basis for the application, and that's their whole point, is to make recommendations to you. You just have to decide whether how valuable their recommendation would be in this type of application, and weigh the pros and cons. So we're certainly not saying that you have to get rid of the planning board in the process. We're just pointing out the issue, and then you decide from your perspective, weighing the pros and cons, whether you're better off with or without the planning board in the process.
So, Joe, you guys, as you stated, you're relying purely on technical matters with this, right? Are there different parameters described for the planning board?
There aren't many parameters described at all.
Well,
We've done training with them, probably at least every other year, to guide them, to help them understand their role. But sometimes, like I said, in the heat of the moment, it's not always easy to follow those guidelines.
Ultimately, though, even if they were subjected to undue non-admissible evidence at a planning board meeting, they're not making the decision regardless. They're just providing us with information to make it easier for us to make a decision. That combined with what you present is what we rely on in order to make those decisions. So I'm not really seeing the connection where it seems to me it's a tenuous thing to say that somebody's going to come in and complain about the value of their property, and what does that got to do with what we're talking about? I mean, ultimately, it's facts and it's the technical aspect of whatever permit is being sought. And so, personally, I don't see that that's an issue with the planning board. Maybe I'm being a little bit ignorant about it, but that's just I don't see it.
Let me just go back and ask a question about when someone comes before the planning board for a special use consideration, and the planning board, in their analysis, decides that it's, they vote 3-2 against it. It still comes before the council, correct?
Yes, correct, but it comes with a recommendation of disapproval.
Right, and so that's kind of weighty right there in terms of, making the decision before we've made a decision. So is it possible to take the decision-making out of the planning board's deliberation on a special use and just use their technical input, much like we're relying on the staff to do? Because what I'm hearing is that the special use permit should be just based on technical aspects and then evidence from experts. The question now becomes, are the planning board experts?
Mr. Hobbs.
Well, I mean, I think I'm not personally aware of a situation where a planning board has done just a review but not made a recommendation. That's sort of their nature, is to review and make a recommendation. But I think that to keep the planning board in the process, we would just continue doing what we're doing now, is to continue to remind you at the beginning of the meeting or the beginning of the hearing that you make your decision solely based on the evidence presented under oath. Now, the planning board may be part of that process, but you'll have to remember that you can have a planning board member talk about what they decided, but remember what they decided and talked about was all unsworn evidence. Even though they're swearing to what was said in the planning board meeting was all incompetent evidence for the most part, because it's not under oath and it's not given the same protections as they would be in your hearing. So that's why we talk about in the beginning that you make your decision based solely on the evidence presented to you, and that's primarily from people that are speaking with firsthand knowledge during your hearing and not what was said prior to your hearing. That's including testimony and evidence presented during your hearing, and disregarding things that were told to you prior to the hearing or other hearsay or other unsworn evidence. So to the extent you can continue to, use the planning board recommendation to supplement your decision, that is to be consistent with it, but to not be the decision, then you've done as much as you can to still get the benefit of the planning board recommendation, but to also know that you are making the decision. You're not rubber stamping, or you're not feeling obligated to follow what the planning board did.
Well, that's the way it exists now, correct?
Yes, sir, that's right.
And ultimately, if a member of the planning board comes into a quasi-judicial hearing and testifies, that's direct evidence about what they discovered during their inquiry. Is that correct?
That's right.
So the argument that this is unsworn we're going to be subjected to unsworn testimony is not a good argument, in my opinion. If they're going to come in and talk about what they did and what they listened to during the course of their inquiry, that's direct evidence.
Yeah, but what they listened to during that hearing was unsworn.
Doesn't matter. They're not telling us what to believe, what somebody that was unsworn concluded or talked about, or whatever they presented. What they are expecting us to listen to is what they did and what their conclusions were. And they can do that. They can present that under oath during a hearing. And it eliminates the argument that we're basing a decision on unsworn testimony.
I think the bottom line is that, you know, our job is to point out the risk and to point out the...
Did you say risk, Robert?
Risk. And again, the blog post from the School of Government identifies those matters, and then you decide how valuable what level of value the planning board brings to that process, and to the extent that you feel like you can continue to make your decisions with the planning board in the process, but understanding your responsibilities during the hearing, then again, you can make your decision to either leave things the way they are or make a change. But again, that's your decision.
I mean, ultimately, that also incorporates the thought that somebody that's accusing us of not making a decision based on testimony heard during a hearing, that's impugning our standing here.
It
right?
is. Yes,
so
yes, it is.
There's no, in my opinion, there is no good reason why we can't figure that out, and we can't stand up ethically on the presented evidence and make our decisions based solely on that.
I would say I would agree, but the fact that the planning board evidence that we might hear that night or that day is just evidence as to what was discussed. It is not, which we can also read. It wasn't evidence that we can rely on as expert testimony. We can hear a testimony that someone they did in a meeting, but their decisions could be based on non-expert.
Yeah, there's a big difference between expert testimony and direct evidence. They're not the same thing. If we want to have somebody come in here and testify as an expert, they have to be voir dired and explain why they're experts, and we have to accept whatever their explanation for that is. That's not the purpose of the planning board, as far as I understand it. Their job is to go out and investigate whatever this request for the special use permit is and figure out whether or not it falls within the guidelines of our ordinances. And if it's slightly outside and it's not a problem, like the last thing that we did on Amy Lane, I don't see an issue with that.
I guess
Much as and as Joe just said, maybe 50% of what the planning board is doing is relative to special use permits. So if we're going to take 50% of their responsibility away from them, what do we need them for?
I guess
that's meant to get your attention, not necessarily the thought that we should get rid of them at all.
I know that. I'm just saying that they have other responsibilities, so obviously we would never get rid of the planning board. I think that it becomes a popularity issue when the council goes against what the planning board's recommending, and it definitely carries a lot of weight.
Well, what do you mean popularity issue?
In other words, it could be construed as very unpopular if the council decides to go against what the planning board is recommending at a public hearing like that, a quasi-judicial, and it happens. And then so you've got public sentiment that was expressed at the planning board basically being overruled at the town council level. And so, that's what I meant by unpopular.
Well, if people wanted to come, if they had that much of a stake in a special use permit and were interested in seeing it done the way that they talked about in the planning board, then they should be here during a council meeting and testify to that effect. And then it becomes direct more direct evidence for us to consider. Without that, they got no argument.
You know, I guess I agree with taking the planning board out of the process. First of all, we got the staff, which prepares a technical report and actually presents it to us during a SUP hearing. Secondly, the planning board just does make a recommendation. We've had times where the planning board has got up there and we've gotten opinions contrary to, in fact, what the recommendation is. So, and based upon nothing other than opinions. And you know, thirdly, we're getting advice from two of our town attorneys that, in fact, you know, as quasi-judicial, we should not have, you know, that basically not proven evidence into our discussion. And the fact is, they're open in meetings with a lot of, you know, interaction, and from people that, in fact, are not sworn to testimony. I just think that, in fact, we should take a little legal guidance here, take them out of the process, and basically see how the next couple ones go. If we look at the one we just did with respect to the retaining walls, basically, what did the planning do to support that recommendation to us? We went through the whole same hearing with technical staff and with the applicant and with, in fact, the engineers. So what value was just an opinion from the planning board? Basically, we still had to go through that whole process and basically make our own judgment on whether or not to approve that. So, you know, I support at least going forward and taking them out of the process. Let's see how the SUP process works without them. I mean, they still have enough other work to be able to do, and we're not taking them, we're not eliminating the planning board. I think we're basically, and once again, I think mostly taking legal advice to do it the right way.
Well, we're not discussing, we're not making that decision right now. This is an authorization for public hearing.
We're just
Well,
discussing.
we're debating.
No, I understand that. So,
We gotta make a decision whether we're gonna send it to public hearing or not.
oh, I have no problem sending it to a public hearing, it's fine. I think we should do that. I'm just voicing my opinion about what this means.
Does an applicant for a special use permit have the right to bypass the planning committee if they so desire?
No, sir, not currently.
Not presently.
Okay, I'm just curious. But they have but they know that what they get from the planning board is not a final decision.
Yes, they know that it's not a final decision, but I can tell you that the applicant places a lot of, you know, they respect that decision and place a lot of weight on that decision, on that recommendation. We've had applicants who withdrawn applications after getting a negative recommendation from the planning board.
Any other discussion? Any questions for Joe? I'll entertain a motion to send this to public hearing.
I'll make a motion that we authorize a public hearing of Ordinance 2311, an amendment to applicable sections of the town code, removing the planning board from the review and approval process for special use permits.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Did I get a vote anywhere?
I will go.
Motion passed 5-0. Thank you, Joe. Moving on to item number 8C, annual update on hazard mitigation plan implementation. Sandy?
Thank you, Mayor Kingston and council. I had a little bit of a speech prepared for my 20-year, but I was told to keep everything short.
Come on, Sandy, you get 20 years into it, you go ahead.
Well, I have a little story real quick, and Lori can probably relate to this. When I came for the interview, it was probably July 2003, and one of the first questions that I'm asked is, what do you know about planning and zoning? And I was like, helps to know somebody. And I remember Chris Layton saying to me, not here, it doesn't. I'm like, okay. So they keep asking me this line of questioning about planning and zoning. I'm like, I'm confused. I applied for the administrative assistant position for the police department. They're like, oh, no, no, no. We're interviewing you for the planning department. And here I am, 20 years later. I didn't have a lick of planning experience other than it helped to know somebody because I had run a haunted house in Baltimore and it helped to know somebody. So 20 years later, it's hard to believe that I'm still happy here. And I wouldn't change the last 20 years for anything. I loved the fact that I got to live in Duck for a year and a half. That was probably the best part. To actually like understand this community. So I thank you guys for the opportunity. Donna mentioned this, and it's great that she's here. She's one of my mentors in this whole hazard mitigation stuff and CRS. But we are, the town of Duck, along with many of the other communities in the Outer Banks, in fact, all of them, we're members of the NFIP, and part of that is the community rating system participation. Our participation helps homeowners to get flood insurance discounts, and they get those discounts based on stuff that the town does to engage and promote flood loss prevention and mitigation. Duck is part of a regional hazard mitigation plan with the other Outer Banks communities, and that plan was adopted in May 2020. It also, that plan includes mitigation action items that are a guide for us and need to be updated manually. As part of our participation, I skipped over this, we actually get 20% discount on flood insurance for our homeowners through this program. And that used to be limited to only properties in the special flood hazard area, but since Risk Rating 2.0 came out, that applies across the board to anybody that applies for flood insurance. Can't be accomplished quickly, so some things take time, and we just update, where that process is. And then one of the things that let me rephrase this. A lot of the items were very minor changes. But there was one item, DCK 15, where I made reference to a lot of the things that you saw a couple months ago when Ken Wilson came back with our RCCP Phase 2 update. There were a lot of structural and non-structural items. I've incorporated that in DCK 15, but I anticipate when we renew this plan in 2025, we will actually incorporate those as separate action items because they're pretty substantial. So that's all I really had to offer, other than, if you saw anything in here that needed corrections or you have questions about, I'm happy to answer them. But if you felt like everything was appropriate, then I would just ask the council make a motion to approve the mitigation action plan so that we can upload it to our website and we'll get it out to all interested parties.
I just have a quick question on that point you just made about the newer things that have come along the pike since we adopted it in 2020. That's just sort of normal, just to wait until you do the real wholesale update and mention it here that you're going to be updating it in 2025, and everybody's good with that. That's how it's done.
I mean, you could do it either way, I think, but we do a much more comprehensive update in 2025. Where we're not just sitting down with our department heads, we're sitting down with the other communities and batting around hazards and mitigation items. And so those items, and we're also working with a consultant, an expert in that field that may say, you should put this in a separate category. Right. Or you should combine these. Got it. And this goes into property protection, whereas this goes to, the natural environment. So that's guidance that our department heads,
that makes
probably
perfect sense.
Better served working with some experts.
Thanks for explaining that to me. But yeah, I thought this was really helpful to see the marked up copy, and then the final is what you're going to put on.
The final will get uploaded to the website as soon as this is approved. And the final is what we sent to CRS on Monday with the progress report that was included in your package.
Any further questions or comments for Sandy? I'll entertain a motion to approve it.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the Town of Duck's hazard migration plan for 2023.
The updates.
Progress report and associated migration action items.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed 5-0. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Item number 9, items referred to and presentations from the town attorney.
No report this evening, Mayor.
Thank you, Robert. Number 10, items referred to and presentations from the town manager. Drew?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Members of council, I'll ask Chief Black, Chief Ackerman, Ms. Cross, and Ms. Nickens to give department reports, and then ask Jessica to give the financial report.
How to do? Or did I do it or you do it? Good evening. It is August. I don't know where the summer went. But here we go for our August update from Duck Fire. I started with a typical day in the summer here. So we're doing a lot of hose training just because it's cooler things to do because we flow water. I just threw a couple pictures up there. I got a picture of Captain Dempsey with Deputy Chief Bachelet. I think they were overseeing a picture you'll see of our new asphalt replacement with the concrete. And then over on the right is a picture of the folks bringing in some benches that went over the sound a week or two ago. So I thought I'd just add a couple pictures. July activities, we'll get right to that. 197.3 hours of training. That's pretty good for our summer months. 100 and so with career, and then 97 with volunteer. I'm going to talk a bit about the volunteers in a little while. No inspections. It is summer. We'll pick that back up in the fall. And then we had 17 entries for about 23 and a half hours of what we call assisting town. So that's coming to the events, that's doing the benches that went in the sound, things like that, just to let you know. So we'll look at our calls. So we're at 301 calls for the year. We're down about 35. You'll see in a minute, it's not July. We've just been down a little bit. Interestingly, I know Southern Shores is down a little bit. So I don't know if it's a trend. I just got the data from Central today. I haven't looked at everyone yet, but we're tracking pretty normal. 30 calls is not a big significant difference. And you can see that when you look at the month statistics, we're pretty much almost a straight line. So we're running the typical amount for July. How does that break down? Very similar to last year, mostly rescue calls, a lot of alarm activations. Alarm activations for us could be cooking, it could be a carbon monoxide detector activation. There's a lot of things that go under that, so that's why you tend to see that as such a large number, several things. It could be just a bad battery. It's all collected in that particular one, so that's why you see that so much. I will tell you it's down a lot, though, because probably about 5 years ago, I was reporting out 70 in a year, and I don't know that we'll hit 70 this year, so we're definitely better. And there's the call distribution just in a pie chart so you get an idea. So alarm activations, again, we treat every alarm activation as if it's real, because until we get there, especially around carbon monoxide, because if those detectors are going off, if we hear alarm activation, we may not know what it is. And especially with CO detectors, with people with gas appliances, with golf carts in their garages, we take those very seriously. So just because it says alarm activation, it's not a false alarm. So just so you know, we're packed up and ready to go on all those calls. So 3 new volunteers. That's pretty big for the town of Duck with volunteers. And on the left is Caroline Crisol. You may know her. She's with Surf Rescue. She's 902, and she's been paying attention. She's been pretty active considering she's very busy with Merrick right now. In the middle is Jackson Kidd. He's a state trooper that's living in town, has a fire background. He actually is certified as an EMT firefighter. He's coming along very quickly for us, not to mention he's a trooper, so he brings a lot to the table already. And then Matthew Fenimore is our youngest and newest, and he's brand new, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but the 3 of them are training a lot right now. So I met with all the volunteers I had a meeting just with them, actually, I had it here, not with the career staff, to get some feedback, because I have volunteers as young Matthew there, and, up to, a lot of you know Rick Fagerston. So I put them all in a room a couple months ago, and I said, what can we be doing different or better? We're addressing the 24/7 with our career staff. We have this volunteer staff now, but how can we've kind of evolved over the last several years very quickly in the time young Jose's been here. So I sat with them to get some feedback, and one of the things we're doing is we're going to what we're calling D shift. It's an operational concept. And so we have A shift, B shift, C shift, and we're actually creating D shift for the volunteers, not to separate them. They still have a captain they're assigned to, but to change the model on how we train operationally. Because the reality is, and you'll probably hear me report out when we do our retreat, the double call. So we're getting paged to a call that our career staff is going to, but within the time frame they're on that call, we're getting a second call. So what we're realizing now is we need to make sure that D shift can be called in to that second call and assist till we can be cleared up or till a chief can go with them. So we've kind of changed the model. They love this idea. And we're doing a lot more trainings now on our Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings that are focused around this. Whether it be decision-making, deployment, scenarios where it's all volunteer-driven, and career staff are just supporting it. So it's making a difference. It will definitely make a difference going forward, and also it's helping them. They also have a homework assignment for me on where they want to be, what their weaknesses are, strengths are, and we'll be working through those as we design their training programs for the winter. So I'm really excited about this. We've had to shift the model. It used to be a lot more volunteers. So now that we have this core group, you can see they're very happy and they're very hot and sweaty, which will get me to my next slide. It's been a hot summer, so despite the heat, we're still training. And again, focusing with the volunteers, we have to train at all skill levels. So this is 2 different trainings done in the heat. Our career staff that's on, they train every day. They're doing something. The picture on the left is basic PPE. So that's for like the Matthews. He's learning just all the different parts of their gear and an air pack. On the right, that's our career staff. That's Cameron and Brandon and Dave Seibert. They're doing toxic bottle drills. So this happens if they're in a bad fire and Brandon, who's sitting there, goes unconscious and runs out of air. They're practicing how to give him not only air, but a new mask. So they're doing, that's a hot weather training. I don't expect our volunteers to do what's happening on the right there. 1 or 2 may get to that point. So the challenge with us is we're always training. We've got people that are brand new to people that are highly skilled and can do the advanced training. So that's a lot of our focus right now. So I just want to tell you that, but I'm very excited about 3 very active new volunteers. And then a quick update on the public safety building. If you drive by, you now see concrete where the truck was. You'll all be happy to. In the picture, it's hard to see, but we have fixed our water retention problem there, so it is now draining where it should in that drain. So I know planning will be happy with that, so we've addressed that. It will be usable on the 11th of August, so it's still curing for a few more days. Again, that was the worst part, and then we'll talk as we go forward if we need to add another section next year. On the left, the police had a request, and we wanted to make them feel good, so they have a blue door. So now they have their own color on the building, so I thought I'd throw a picture in. And with that, I will take any questions. I did throw a picture in from last night. We had training last night at the station, and that is from Wallops Island, the rocket. And one of the firefighters took this coming over the building with the flag, so I threw that in. But I'll take any questions if you have them.
I do have a question on
Sure.
the D shift part,
Yeah.
and I don't want to keep you, but that's a really great idea to kind of poll them and find out how you can tap into what the volunteers need. And so is it still the case, even though they might be training differently, that they still get called out to everything, or is
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
so they just know kind of what where they are.
Where they fall, right. So that's exactly what we're doing with them. So we have, Ralph's a great example. He's done a lot of training with us. He's a driver. He can take the truck out, take the engine out to follow us. They all know, we are training them till their skill level, so they know what they can do. What's the most important thing we're there for that we see the least is fire. They all, right now, can wrap a hydrant, get water, and flow water on a fire. They don't even need to go in. They can get water on the fire. That is our number one task that everyone must know, and they can already do that. Decision-making around alarm activation, things like that. Advanced things we may call for Southern Shores. It may be splitting crews. We'll talk about more at the retreat, but I am watching that because it's happening in KDH, it's happening in Kitty Hawk, it's happening in Southern Shores, that double call. We want to make sure that we're covering that second call. So,
Thank you.
but thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Thank you for being here tonight, not that you had any choice. I just want to congratulate Chief Black on the pickup of Trooper Kid. Just all three volunteers are great, but he is just phenomenal. Maybe one day I'll convince him of the errors in his ways, and he'll stop wanting to be a trooper and actually be a police officer, so keep working on that. Whoa. Rob knows where I'm going with that. July has been a really busy month for us, kind of all over the place in terms of the types of calls we're running. But traffic enforcement remains just on par with what we've seen. No change in motor vehicle crashes between June and July. Still, the majority are at our crosswalks and people crossing. Knock on wood, haven't had any serious crashes over this last month. Business checks continue to be a priority at night, and then our extra patrols jumped up considerably in the month of July, 1,188 calls total. And just wanted to remind everyone that we do put a more comprehensive report of all of our activity that's posted online and available on our website, and that breaks down every one of the 1,188 calls for anybody interested in that. Wanted to look at a better way to display LPR data because the graphs I was using just impossible to read. We still are going to post online the full array of data for the public to look at and kind of pick apart, but I wanted to just show you in 2 slides really I think what we're trying to capture, and that's the total volume that's coming into DUC on this first slide. So if you look at that, our peak week, I broke it down into 7-day weeks. The peak week for us was June 26th through July 2nd. We saw a total of just about 72,000 vehicles enter DUC during that 7-day period. So huge amount of traffic coming through. The next slide shows you a comparison. The blue slide is the traffic that's heading into Corolla, and the orange is overall traffic that's coming into DUC. And what we're seeing consistently week after week after week, we're at 61% of the vehicles are going. So about 10% higher than what we predicted we'd see when we put this new equipment in place. So, but every week it's between 58 and 61%. So very happy with that data. Again, if there's any different way council would like to see the data displayed or any other comparisons, I'd be glad to run that. Just wanted to have something that was more visually digestible for you. Mayor Kingston, at the last meeting you'd asked about the insignia. One of the things I'm finding is that folks that use sewing machines seem to be non-existent anymore. We're having a terrible time getting somebody to sew on our insignia. Our uniform company does it, but they're backed up weeks and months. So we've got them in. This is what they look like. So on the left is the corporal's insignia, on the right is the sergeant. and we will have them on our uniform just as soon as we can find somebody, or as soon as I buy a sewing machine and learn to sew. So, working on that. It's probably not going to happen.
I'm thinking of all the, if you go to a bike week or a rally, you know, the patches, there's a gal there that's, you know who I mean?
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I should save up everything for Bike Week next year. We used to have several seamstresses on the beach, and all of them have since retired. It's just becoming really hard. Want to just give a really brief kind of overview of how our technology solves crimes. Council's been extremely generous to us in allowing us to have so many forms of technology, and I just want to show how they work together in a pretty simple example, real world example. So last week, Officer Davis walks out of the police department. There's a gentleman in the parking lot, big dent in the front quarter panel of his car. Says that he was going around the corner at Bomb Trail on the way to Corolla, and a truck crosses over the center line and strikes him. It's not a major head-on strike, but it bounces off, causes some damage. Truck continues on, victim continues on, goes to the police department. The man had virtually no information about no tag, no writing on the vehicle. All he knew, it was a delivery truck, which, you know, there's tons of those that go up and down our corridor every day. Officer Davis immediately jumps on his computer, pulls up the new traffic cameras that we have, and within 3 minutes, he's able to narrow down a time frame, and he sees this truck that matches every description that he had. He then, of course, doesn't have a tag or anything to go on, so he then uses the LPR system to go in with that same time frame, identify this car. Now he knows the license tag of it as well as the business that owns the truck, makes a phone call to the regional fleet manager, immediately is able to tell him who the driver was. Within 10 minutes, the driver's on the phone, and in this particular case, we do believe the driver didn't realize that the back end of the truck had crossed over. So we don't believe there was a crime in this, but if there were, we'd have solved it instantly. We'd have had that driver cited and had this case closed within a matter of 15, 20 minutes. So it's a simplistic example of how this ended up, but in this case, the driver walked away with a report, was easily able to file an insurance claim, get his car fixed, he leaves happy. So again, it's simple, but the technology works together. We have a powerful system with the video cameras, the LPR data, and now the Flex CAD system that we're joined with the county on is just bringing in just an amazing amount of data for us. Just to give you an example, the first part of the year, we downloaded the other day as we're getting into the system about 6,000 data points that came in within a one-day period. So just an immense amount of data, and the platforms are allowing us to comb through that data in a really efficient way and really use it. So I think exciting things to come there. It's been money very well spent, and I think it's gonna absolutely come in handy for us to solve something big. Just a quick update on the traffic camera pilots, and I just talked about that, but we're seeing very positive public opinion on them. I had one complaint from a Southern Shores resident, and it really wasn't a valid complaint, frankly, but we dealt with that. It is now the go-to source for traffic conditions. Kay pulled me some statistics today. She's been phenomenal in getting the word out. We had about 4,600 page views in the last 30-day period of people jumping on the town website to pull up those live cameras. So the word is getting out there. They're being used. The officers absolutely love them and have fully embraced them, and it's become a new tool for them. And then we did, as I told you before, we received an anonymous donation from a Duck resident who completely funded the camera that's at Bomb Trail up there. So that was a huge success, allowing us to get 3 pilot cameras up. So I hope next budget year to be able to talk about some expansion there. We also, in the world of cameras, and I'm sorry I'm so camera heavy tonight, but we completed our first public-private partnership The HOA at Palmer's Island had approached us and said, we really want to put cameras at our entrance, but we're not here all the time. You know, we want somebody to be able to leverage that information and use it. If somebody breaks into our house, we want you to instantly have access to find out who came in. So we talked it through. We executed a very thorough MOU with them, and we're going to be adding 2 cameras there on their private property. They're going to pay for that 100% of the cost, and we've got a 5-year agreement with them to do that. So I think it's going to be a big win, and it really, in my mind, I hope this is the first of many. I think there's great opportunity to wrap these in. One of the powers of cameras is having them in one place. So if everybody has their own system, it becomes very difficult to go view that video and pull it. Having it all on one dashboard, every camera that's linked to the town system there, makes searching that data and finding what we need very easy. So it's been a big win.
Chief, could I ask a quick question about that? When you say it's not public-facing, could you explain that to me?
Sure. So wherever we can, we want to have our public be able to see any of our cameras that they can. Our traffic cameras are a great example of that. But we want to make sure we're not exposing anybody's privacy rights or trampling on anybody's privacy rights. So because these particular cameras are in a private space, we won't post that video on our website for the public to see. Now, the folks that live in that community have full access to see that. And as we talk about more cameras, we'll really look at what's appropriate to have the public see and what isn't.
Taking that one step further, and then I'll, is the public, is just disclosure of the fact that there's cameras. Is that, I know something that we do in property management, if we have even a Ring doorbell, we obviously don't have any cameras trained on private areas, but we do have them on the driveway and anything public, you know, but we disclose that regardless. So I was wondering, does that come into play at all, disclosure?
It's, at this point, it hasn't, because with the exception of this project and in their MOU, it lays out exactly how that footage is going to be used. But our cameras to date are all in public spaces. So we haven't crossed that realm, and frankly, that was one of the concerns that we got out of a Southern Shores resident. The camera covered literally a 5-foot corner of their lot, and they were upset about that we hadn't told them. We rectified that. But if we do cross the line where we're starting to put cameras in private spaces, it is something we're going to have to think through. And I'm also a firm believer, if you've got cameras up, we need to tell people we've got them up. It's a great deterrent. So, you know, signage on camera posts telling people what's up there is almost as effective as the camera itself. So definitely, it's on our radar.
Thank you.
For sure. Unfortunately, things happen. Vandalism has been a big issue for us over the last few weeks. We had 3 instances of benches thrown into the sound off the boardwalk. And we believe that's an unrelated incident, but then we had what we believe is a group of youth kicked out the pickets of a 50-foot section of boardwalk. Not only did that leave a really dangerous situation for folks using the boardwalk, Drew and Sandy and Kim were out there in extreme temperatures trying to get that shored up as best they can. So it created a lot of issues for us. We had a Duck resident that came forth and offered a $500 reward. We've worked with their community crime line to get that out. Kay has done an exceptional job getting that out on social media. To date, we've had 1 tip come in. Unfortunately, we were able to clear that one. It wasn't related. There was a camera here at the Town Hall complex that caught a group of youth out in the street placing cones across the street about 1 a.m. in the morning to block traffic. Officer came through almost immediately after that happened, cleared them off the road. Another officer came through right after. They were back. He picked him up, took him away, and then we had the same thing happen the following night at a different location. We have yet to figure out where these cones came from because they weren't town-owned cones, and we've yet to find a business that had them. So still working on that. But unfortunately, the video we received just wasn't clear enough for us to get that out on social media to try and identify those suspects. But from what we could make out, probably fairly young juveniles. And I'm quite certain that this damage took several people to accomplish. So unfortunately, we haven't solved that yet, although it's still active out there, and my hopes are still high. I will say that the public engagement on social media over this was just absolute outrage, and that's why I put the emoji up there. There were so many positive comments towards the town of Duck for the amenities that we had out there, and just sheer anger that somebody would do this to something that so many people love. So if there is a positive side to this, it's that. But it happened, so we'll have to deal with it.
Chief, we don't have cameras on the boardwalk, apparently.
We don't. And the next thing I'm going to talk about, I was asked by Councilman Whitman, we had a discussion immediately following the damage out there about cameras. An overall townwide camera project has absolutely been on our radar for a while. It's something Drew and I have talked about from the day he got here. We have looked at numerous ways to improve the infrastructure here at Town Hall, throughout the park, boardwalk, and town. Unfortunately, it's an extremely costly endeavor to do it. We know it needs to be done, and we're trying to break it down into phases that are manageable chunks that we can get done. In what Councilman Whitman asked me to look at was specifically getting cameras out on the southern section of the boardwalk here. And I'll actually put up a picture, just kind of give you an idea of the area we're trying to encompass there. When I looked at it, there's some logistical challenges. One, we don't have 110 power out on our boardwalk. We use solar power to power our lighting. Sandy and Kim Pittman have looked at a potential solution, which would be to run 110 volt power from the middle. If you look at the portion of the boardwalk that lands at the north parking lot, we'd be able to run power out to the hub, if you will, there. And we'd be able from there to put 3 cameras out on the boardwalk. The cameras we would use are called a multi-sensor camera. So it's essentially 4 cameras in one. It's in a round disc about 10 inches. It uses 4 completely independent cameras within it that are fully adjustable for angle and coverage, but it would allow us to cover 100% of each of those intersections out on the beach, or out on the boardwalk rather, in real time, high definition video. We'd be able to leverage our Cradle Point partnership with FirstNet to handle the connectivity on it. We'd be able to look at possibly having some of those cameras public facing, people who maybe wanted to enjoy the sunset and not a negative thing out there. So the bottom line is, I've talked to Drew about potential funding for it. It was not something we were able to fit in the budget this year. And please tell me if I'm overstepping what I'm saying, Drew. My understanding is we have some money in the budget that was earmarked for radar vehicle sensors at either end of town. So the question we would pose to the council is, from a police department perspective, we see both projects as important to us. But the LPR data that we're seeing from the new system is proven to be consistent and reliable. It would not hurt our endeavors to push the traffic sensor program off another year and utilize those earmarked funds, which have not been used yet, to put the cameras out here on this section of boardwalk.
So I think the question then becomes to the council is, what's more important? You know, we talked about the radar-based vehicle sensors as part of your capital improvement plan. It's funded in the current year's budget. The second or subsequent phases of the camera project were dependent on the success of the initial pilot of 2 cameras, now 3. That's proving to be very successful. So we would plan to be coming back to you in fiscal 25 for phase 2 of the camera project. So the question is, what's more important to you today? The cameras on the boardwalk or the vehicle sensors? You know, what you hear from Chief Ackerman is that the data that we're getting right now from the LPRs is sufficient. It's not as granular, I guess, as he would like to have to be able to report on traffic activity. But we can live without that another year. We can live without the cameras for another year, but it really is. This is not a decision the staff makes. This is a decision the council makes. What's more important to you in your roles as the governing body of the community?
I would simply say that it's important to protect our assets, and obviously the boardwalk is a big asset, and that's pretty costly to repair that. And I think if we could enhance security, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Can people, go on. I was just going to say, can people walk on that boardwalk? I mean, I guess we can't stop them, but they can go do 24 hours a day if they want.
Yes, sir. And as a matter of fact, the boardwalk has lights on it, so we don't discourage at all people walking out there.
So then I think the cameras is a good decision.
Jeff, you have a guesstimate of what it was going to cost to put the 3 cameras out there?
Yeah, with all the infrastructure needed to support it, it comes in almost exactly at the cost of the other project, which is right at $20,000.
And Drew, we have approximately $5,000 worth of physical damage, not counting Kim's time.
I don't know. I don't have the number on that. I don't know what the pickets cost.
And plus the lumber that had to be purchased to do the temporary repairs.
Right, so the lumber we purchased on Friday, and then doesn't count my time, your time, or then now Kim's time to do the pickets. So yeah.
So you're talking 20,000.
Yeah, and the fire department coming in and taking benches out of the sound.
benches too. So we're knocking off approximately, I'd say, $5,000 there. So really, we've lost $5,000 already.
And you know, and the chief and I had this discussion earlier today. The cameras will not prevent crime, 100% of the crime. They will act as a deterrent, especially if they have signs this area is under video surveillance. It will help us solve or help us get closer to solving instances of vandalism, that particular crime. What encumbers the police department is we can get this video data of damage that happens on Friday. They've got basically 12 hours to figure out who did it, where they're staying, before they're packing up and they're leaving town. The deterrent value alone, I think, has a lot of value. We've been talking about wanting to have cameras on the boardwalk. Again, it is an asset, but it's also a draw to Duck from a tourism promotion point of view. So yeah, we can do either very effectively this year, just a matter of what direction council wants to give us.
I know on Friday, Drew and I met 2 people that loved the boardwalk, very upset what happened there, and they told us about another section they thought was vandalized, and it was just old age. Yeah.
Implementing the cameras on the boardwalk would take 6 months, about 3 months?
No, I think we'd be able to do this very rapidly. If Mr. Whitman would agree to assist with the electrical aspect of it. I know that my team, especially we're getting closer towards fall, we can find the time to get out there and do it. But I think if this is a council decides this is a priority, we'll make it happen as rapidly as we can.
And are you concerned about the weather, the damages that we take a lot of wind out there?
These cameras, the particular ones we've spec'd out, meet all the specifications for extreme weather. So I don't see any issue with that. And the other infrastructure we've designed to support it, we're looking at stainless steel enclosures and proper conduit to run everything in. So I think we've covered all the angles and we've got some pretty good experience with that, or at least Kim does.
Yeah.
He knows where the vulnerabilities are, so I think he can guide us well.
Monica, I can tell you that the services for the solar panels and the lighting have been there, I want to say 12 years now. And they're like brand new, other than problems with the batteries. That's it.
That's good to hear. Good. I'm in favor of the cameras on the boardwalk just for everything that we're hearing.
So is that the consensus of the,
Let's make a motion
yes, thank you.
to authorize the police department to hook up these cameras and put them on the boardwalk.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, Council. We'll get it done.
You were looking for something to do, weren't you, Chief?
You know, just a comment, Chief, if I can. And this is purely anecdotal. I mean, this is not a professional analysis, but I read the blotter every week when it comes out. And, I mean, I notice there's more troubling issues than usually. You know, more shoplifting, more aggravated assault type of stuff. It's like, I don't know, it's just worrisome, you know? I mean, I think you guys are gonna be working harder in the future, I'm afraid to say, unless we, I don't know what we do.
I appreciate that. I always say we're extremely fortunate to be in Duck. It's a safe community. It's a great
Yeah.
place to live and visit, but we're not immune.
We're not immune.
From
I mean,
outside influences, and
I mean,
that's
I think
generally where these things come from.
Anything we can do on the prevention thing, like, I mean, I hate to say it, but, you know, the more cameras, the better. I mean, these kids were either really smart and knew that they didn't have cameras there, or they were just dumb and lucky, you know, but they might have been smart, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know.
Could go either way, but hopefully won't be as lucky next time.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Council.
I don't know, did Jim put him in there? He did, I got it. All right. We know Jim loves flowers and butterflies and all kinds of pretty pictures. God love him and thank him for doing this report. July is one of those odd months for us when we come to reporting, so we don't have like a slate of months to compare to. We only have July. And it looks like building permits are up slightly with one, and overall tow permits are slightly up. But I don't really notice that much anymore because I've got Jim Gould and Melissa Feldhausen, and they have been doing a fantastic job. So I wanted to make sure I give them a shout out. Looking at the maps, everything's kind of spread out on the north side. And you can see we kind of got a little bit more centralized in the village area as we get to the south end. Of importance, we did have one new permit issued for a new house up in Sanderling at 133 Martin Lane. It's going to be a 5-bedroom, heavily wooded lot that they're going to try and preserve as much as possible. Had to walk that with a bunch of poison ivy surrounding us. We also had, in comparison, one in July last year, and then 2 substantial improvements last year. So from straight numbers, it looks like we're a little down in that regard. Jim wanted me to touch on our solid waste ordinance and some of the things that have been happening. We adopted some revisions in April 2023. Those goals were to make it easier for all stakeholders and the public to understand and staff to enforce, and also to help to preserve and protect the pristine environment of the town of Duck. Let's see, he included some timeline stuff, but that's old news. We don't need to go over that. Since we started enforcing in March, we've had 328 requests for action is what Jim's calling them. They're basically letters saying, hey, you've got trash cans out on the wrong day, or you haven't pulled them back. Of those, and then we've had 4, and the way that works is you get 3 letters, 3 warning letters, and then we actually send a notice of violation. So there's plenty of time to figure out how to do something right. We've only had to issue 5 notice of violations, and we haven't issued any actual civil citations. Now, with that being said, we don't get every street every week, so it's kind of like a flip of a coin if you get busted or called out. Jim did want me to point out that he has been conducting one-on-one meetings with different communities to get to know the HOAs and their boards and see what their concerns are. And he's met with 9 different HOAs. They have all been explained this process, and he's had pretty good feedback. Many have felt that this is unrealistic, even though they appreciate our efforts. So just throwing that out there.
I'm sorry, Sandy, could you repeat that? Because it seems important. 9 HOAs?
9 HOAs. He's met with Ocean Crest, Old Duck Beach, Palmer's Island, Port Trinity, Potaskeet, Saltaire, Sand Dollar Shores, Georgetown Sands, and Sound Sea Village. And he's explained to them all the trash can stuff. I mean, he's talked about other things, but he wanted to let you all know that he's met with 9 different communities and explained our process, why this happened, and, you know, the request for action letters and how that translates and then goes into a notice of violation and civil citation.
And all of them said it was unrealistic?
Not all of them. I think there's definitely some pessimism in terms of what can be accomplished. But that's just education. I mean, it's a hard task. It's not going to be solved overnight. You know, if you look back at when we first initiated an ordinance regarding tents, we constantly heard people saying, you know, you're not making a difference. Well, we are making a difference, and you're going to hear more about that next month.
Okay, thank you.
Our coastal resiliency project, we had our bid opening on July 11th. That was our second bid. The first one we didn't have any players. Second one we had 2. Those contract discussions are going to be brought to you in August, so I don't want to go into a great amount of detail with that. That same day, July 11th, we kicked off our West Side feasibility study. So in December, budget discussions 2022, DUC 2032 vision development, Town Council basically authorized us to move forward with a West Side feasibility study, even though we did not get a grant from NCDOT, which was the goal. That started on July 11th. We walked the entire west side from Aqua all the way down to actually Southern Shores, which will probably be a topic of discussion at some point as to where the actual trail terminates, because it may make more sense to go into Southern Shores. But that's for another discussion. Just want to let you know we got kicked off. We have plans to bring more back to you, probably at the October, before the October meeting, if not sooner. We did apply for Phase 4 of the Resilient Coastal Communities Program. You recall we had Phase 1 and 2, which was vulnerability assessment, and then prioritizing or developing a list of priorities and prioritizing them. And then Phase 3 was our neighborhood stormwater study, where we took that and translated it to a grant application for Phase 4. We were not awarded that grant. There was only the state only received $1 million, and they split that amongst 5 projects. So we will be resubmitting in October 2023, and we may revamp our grant application for a larger pot to make it more palatable or viable for approval. Town Park Shoreline Protection Project has kicked off as well. VHB's Envirotech company, TCS, has been surveying the site. They were out from the 17th, and as of last week, last Friday, they were still here, and there was a bunch of stuff out in the water. So they've been doing groundwork in the park and in the water.
They were here today.
Not surprising. You heard me mention NFIP earlier, then CRS ratings, the CRS system. We submitted our annual recertification July 31st. It's due on August 1st every year, with 2025 being another big year, kind of like the Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. That same year, we'll be doing something much more substantial. So we should hear back from them probably in September, October timeframe as to whether or not we continue to maintain our class rating 6. I got word from Emerald Forest today that they are here. They are planting sea oats and bitter panicum grass along the ocean front. So if you see them out there, say thank you. And I expect they'll probably be here maybe 2 more weeks. Bitter panic grass and sea oats is not quite as laborious as beach grass. And then last but not least, we had to take a break last Friday. Was it last Friday we took a break because of the heat? But the weather this week is ripe. So let's get out and clean up some litter on Friday. He did not tell me what time, but I'm assuming 7 a.m. at the town shed. And I'll entertain any questions you may have.
I know I'm gonna get shot with this, but what is the status with the trash cans around town that are supposed to be emptied?
Which, you mean the big bellies?
No, not all the ones but the big bellies.
In the town park?
Town park, the boardwalk.
Well, we have a contractor who is supposed to be doing that on a daily basis, and from what I understand with some recent discussions, it's been questionable as to whether they are adhering to their contract. At the end of the year, that will be taken over by the town of Duck. So we will hopefully not have that issue anymore. And we should be getting two new big bellies in the next few weeks, I believe, sooner than expected. Any other questions?
Thanks for the 20 years.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah.
You got me for a few more. Try to be helpful.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here, and I'm going to keep this relatively short. I'm going to start off with just an overview of the 4th of July parade. Approximately 2,400 people were in attendance at the actual parade, and we had 30 parade entries, not including council, the flag bearers, and the people at the beginning of the parade. We did have 250. I feel like that's an underestimate of the number of people that came here to the community celebration. And one thing that I'm going to strive to do for next year is promote the community celebration a little bit more, because there were so many people that I had just met in passing on my way back to the town park who had no idea that there was a second part to the 4th of July. So definitely want to make sure that that is being put out even more. And we had 552 snow cones provided. So obviously that is a very big hit, and I'd like to see that continue.
I would think that's a good indication that we had more than 250 people at the community celebration. Because not too many people eat more than 2 snow cones.
You underestimate our fire department.
Okay.
I would say a lot more there.
A little bit of what I'm doing, I am in the process of overhauling our media and our graphics, kind of just freshening things up, making them a little bit more eye-catching and informative, and just brightening everything up. Along with that comes new content creation and new framework for getting messaging out. Along with that is audience growth and trend monitoring and breaking down analytics to see what message is getting across the most effective on which platform, and also creating more opportunities for engagement, doing more, making social media and just some of our content more personable, and making, and I feel like Jeff's example of, people being really upset with the boardwalk, that I think that was an opportunity, to kind of relate with the community. And obviously we use our platforms to get that message out, but then we get that sentiment from, people who follow us on our website and social media platforms, and people that are messaging and responding to them and using that as kind of a gateway to build that rapport and that relationship with the community, because it is important. Looking at web updates and general housekeeping, just keeping things tidy, clean, looking at user searches to see what they're looking for, how to make that information more accessible. And last but certainly not least, the meeting hall audiovisual upgrades are in progress. They were supposed to have been done for this meeting, but one of the parts that we were sent is a dud and does not work. So we are waiting for that replacement, and hopefully it will be ready to go by next week's planning board meeting. Jazz Festival is, I keep thinking that it's in the fall season, so it's a little bit further away, and I'm like in denial that it's 2 months away. It's crazy how quickly this year's gone. So we are in the process of getting ready to send out the food vendor RFPs, and I'm going to be working with Betsy to get the volunteer recruitment and information together, and I am reaching out for as many sponsorships as I can. And I should hear back from the North Carolina Arts Council this month about the grant that I had applied for. I think their notifications start going out in August, so hopefully we'll get some good news from that. Events update, we've had pretty good attendance despite the weather. We've had 6,300 attendees at all of our summer events, $1,900 in merchandise sales, and a total of $3,100 since May. And with that content creation and updating the graphics, along with that will come updated merchandise photos, so our website will be updated with that, and that will be accessible on our social media as well. We've had 241 bricks sold to date, and we had a couple new events this year just to try them out. We had the Crawl a Wild Horse Fund come, and they brought Riptide, which you can see pictured there. It was a huge hit. We had a lot of people come, and they got to learn about the organization and what they do and why they rescue these horses. A lot of people, they don't understand why a horse is removed from its environment, but there's a whole explanation as to why. And it was a great education opportunity, and also to involve some of our community that you often see about, but you never really get to experience firsthand. And next week we have Nest coming to do a presentation on sea turtles and their prevalence on the Outer Banks and what Nest does to help protect them and take care of them. Also, just wanted to throw this out there. We do have the next opening reception for the art show coming up August 9th. It is for women painters of the Outer Banks, and we have some great artists participating in that. So the opening reception is from 4 to 6. Everyone's welcome. It's free, but I think it's great to have all of these local artists in one art show. And we do have a summer event survey. This is going to be put out in our e-news, which also about the e-news, we changed the day that it goes out on. We started sending it on Monday, so people are able to get their updates at the beginning of the week rather than Tuesday, so they're able to plan ahead, and also they don't miss Tuesday's events. So we do have this survey that's live. It will be circulated, but if anyone's attended any of the summer events, please let us know. Take the survey, let us know what you like, dislike. It all helps us in the long run, so please just take a moment to complete that. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi, Jessica.
All right, so I'm going to give you a quick monthly finance update. If you recall, last month we moved these back 1 month to give us a little more time to review everything. So this is for July 2023. We ended June with a balance of $12,562,952. The balance excluding the beach nourishment funds was just shy of that at $12,400,000. And that compared to last June, with a 4.1 increase in overall balances. The general checking account balance was just over $1 million. This was 8.4% of the general fund cash balance. The remaining funds are located in our investment accounts, with the majority being in the capital management trust. Revenues, this just shows the total collection compared to the prior year. I'm going to go in those a little more detailed. Starting with the sales and use tax collections. For June, we received March and April collections. This is a 3% increase compared to the prior year. Year to date, we do have an 11.9% increase. And then for property taxes, these were for May and June collections. We did see a 44% decrease compared to the same period in the prior year, but we have just under a 1% increase overall for the fiscal year compared to 2022. And we have collected over 100% for the year. For motor vehicle tax, there was also a 29% decrease compared to the prior year, but a 4.5% increase overall for the year. For occupancy tax, this is for the April and May collections. It was a 5% decrease for that time period compared to the prior year, but year to date, again, we're still up just over 5% for the year. For utility franchise tax, we received collections from the quarter ending March 31st. This was a 13.4% increase compared to the same period in the prior year. And then land transfer tax collections for the quarter ending June 30th. This is a 29% decrease compared to the prior year, but we anticipated this with the market changing. We did budget conservatively, and we still overpassed our budgeted amount by just over $35,000 for the year. For ABC profits and mixed beverage tax, collections were for the quarter ending March 31st. This was a 2.5% increase, just barely over $200 compared to 2022. And then our total investment earnings were still pretty high, even though our beach nourishment funds were paid out. So that was $52,063. The highest yield obviously was in our North Carolina capital management portfolio with 5.14%. And then just some other revenues that we collected, the RCCP grant for phases 1 through 3. This was not budgeted, and it was just over $58,000. We received that. And then rental income for the property that you guys acquired was just over $6,600. And then year to date, those the rental income funds was over $34,000. Overall, our expenditures are within budget. And revenues versus expenditures ending June 30th, the revenues are higher by just over $65,000. And we will continue to see that increase as we receive revenues for the last fiscal year. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
On the house, in that $34,000 year to date, that's the money that we got when they pay for their week, that we get the money up front?
Yes, and that already has expenses taken out as well.
So right now, there's approximately 7 weeks left of the big season. That money's already paid for in that $34,000.
I'll let Drew speak on that.
So the deposit is paid. So a portion of it's paid, but the rest of it gets paid the week they show up. And I'm looking at Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau. It's right before they show up. So unless they have paid for the full week, they don't get the access code. So we get the money a portion of the money when they book, and then we get the remainder when they are coming.
So that 34 will go up then?
Yes, sir.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, we still have 1 or 2 weeks open as well.
Yeah, we have a couple weeks open this month, but the rest of it's been booked pretty solid.
Yes.
Yeah, that's part of the, just the way the Vacation Rental Act works, that you can only have 50%, and then you get the balance when they check in. I had a question, though, and I I struggle with it this time of year, with the year-to-date number that you're giving us. You're giving us June numbers, and so my understanding would be that this would be the end of the year for the full 22, 23 year, unfinished because you're still getting some receipts.
Yes, we're still getting receipts for expenses, and then also we're still receiving revenues through the end of this month.
So when you say, that helps me because, the data says, we're looking at month over month in the one section, and then you bullet it and say, it's an increase or decrease compared month over month, and then year to date, just taking occupancy tax, 5.3 increase compared to the same period in fiscal '22. So that means it's a snapshot of August, looking at this in 2022 compared, you're looking at it and
Yes.
through the same lens as you were a year ago.
Yes, I
basically.
took out the last month of revenues, and that's what the total's compared to from last year.
Okay, because again, just on the front, when you do the total collections with prior year comparisons, the occupancy tax seems to, still be under budget, but that's because we haven't realized.
Yeah, I think it's $96,000 under budget right now, but I'm expecting we're gonna
And that,
go in excess.
you expecting that to come in September or October? When do you feel like we're going to?
It'll be this month, so probably in a couple days I'll receive that.
Okay. And
Usually
then-
it's right after the first of the
So
week.
September is really the better month for us to kind of get the whole end of.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, and I also wanted to thank you all for approving our municipal accounting services contract. That will help us all and benefit the town greatly, so thank you.
That seems exciting.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Jessica. Going on to item number 11, mayor's agenda. I only have one item tonight. I'll be meeting with the mayor, other mayors, and the chairman on August 16th, hosted by Kildare Hills. And with that, we'll go on to item number 12, council members' agenda, starting with our mayor pro tem, Monica Thibodeau.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I just wanted to circle back when I had a moment about the planning board attendance, where I think, Joe, just so I can clarify it, that it's proposed that missing 3 meetings could get you ousted by the planning board, but ultimately that's the council's decision. Is that what you said?
That's correct. Only the council could appoint or remove members. So they would make what they adopted is in their rules of procedure, and they would have the option of making a recommendation to the council that that individual will be removed.
Okay, because I'm just thinking of like a health issue or something, but that's not good to know. And certainly we want everyone to be here as much as they can. But that was kind of a new thing for me. And then I would love to get I should have asked about the tent meeting that we had with the vendors, but maybe we could just pick that up in the mid-month meeting, just to get an overview, because I understand, didn't that occur already?
It did, and you'll be getting, not at the mid-month, but I think the September meeting, the results of the tent survey, and we'll be coming, and then Sandy will also be able to bring you information about that meeting, bundle it all together, and then try to get your guidance on what you'd like us to do with that.
September?
I think that was her plan for the tents, was in September.
Or possibly the fall. Sometime in
Yes,
the fall.
so sometime it's always been planned to be the end of the season, because whatever, we want the council have enough time to think about it, deliberate about it, and get it in place prior to the next season. We never thought we were going to get anything in place this season.
Okay, great, thank you. And I definitely want to continue to hear about the trash can ordinance. We definitely are getting a lot of public input about that, but I just appreciate everything everyone's trying to do. But I do know that, the unrealistic portions of it and that kind of thing. But we'll continue talking about that after the season and get some more information. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Councilmember Rob Mooney.
Nothing from me.
Thanks, Rob. Councilmember Sandy Whitman.
I'd just like to thank Sandy Cross for her 20 years of sticking around here.
Thanks, Sandy. Councilmember Tony Shadow.
No comments tonight, thank you.
All right, with that, we'll go to 13, public comments. Would anyone like to address the council please come forward to the podium. You have 3 minutes.
Our large audience.
Any other business come before council this evening? There being none, I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem to read the motion to take us in a closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to enter closed session in accordance with Section 143-318.11(6) of the North Carolina General Statutes to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee.
All in favor of the motion to go into closed session, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are now in closed session. Thank you, staff that might be departing.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now at a closed session, and I'd like to report out by making a motion that we are now adjusting the town manager's salary effective August 1. His new salary will be $159,874, and he will be given a $10,000 bonus. And that's a motion. Any discussion on the motion? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0. I will remind council that our next meeting is now going to be Monday, August 21st at 1 p.m. With that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. So moved. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are now adjourned.
Okay.